Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming in your dozens. When I was a student here, this was the police station. This was the police station of Stellenbosch. It's, to me, a very special moment today to be talking to the two young people on my left, whom I've both known for a while. In case of Nadia, since she was in primary school. As you may know, I had an intimate relationship with our own Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in the sense that I was tasked with popularizing the whole process through television. And so we made a weekly documentary called the Truth Commission Special Report, which in a sense became the public face of the Truth Commission, because you would have radio and television during the week broadcast little snippets, and on Sunday nights we put the whole context and show the people behind it and explain the process. And my only claim to fame in journalism was that the Truth Commission Special Report was more popular than Days of Our Lives. Not because of we were so brilliant, but because of the thirst of people to know at that stage. So I'm glad to see there's some younger people here, because it's a different country. 1996, when the Truth Commission happened, South Africa looked a lot different. I saw my involvement with the Truth Commission as a period of my life. It was a spectacular privilege to be so intimately involved. Because when the people who negotiated our settlement in '94, when they decided that Nuremberg trials were not the way to go, they settled on this process of what they called restorative justice. I know it is very fashionable nowadays to knock the Truth Commission, but I must just tell you my personal experience of 2.5 years of being involved with it 7 days a week, and meeting virtually everybody involved with the Truth Commission, even witnesses and amnesty applicants, told me that it was a very spectacular, unique process. And I still believe that if we hadn't gone as a nation through that process, we would not be so at peace for the measure we are at peace with ourselves as we are now. But I was an outsider, and other people saw and experienced the Truth Commission in a completely different way. I was not touched in the physical sense, because remember the Truth Commission focused on physical violence almost, which is one of its big flaws. That through the legislation, it was about serious assault, kidnapping, murder, and torture. So I wasn't one of those. And so today we have two young people who were touched in a completely different way. And we need to discuss with them how that experience went for them. So Nadia is the daughter of my good, really special old friend Anton Lubowski, who was assassinated. And Lukhanyo is the son of one of our other heroes in the subcontinent, Fort Calata. Fort Calata was a giant of the 80s. And so here we are, but I'm not going to do big introductions. Nadia, let me ask you, tell us about who you are now and what you're doing. You're in education?
Yeah, so one doesn't quite know how one gets to where one is in the time that one is, but one of the things that I'm incredibly passionate about is education, and particularly education for young children, so early childhood development, and became a preschool teacher and continued to work. I suppose what a defining moment in my life was when I was at a school doing my internship, because when you study to become a teacher, you have to do an internship, and basically it's your prerogative to go and find that school. And whenever I went to white schools, it was sort of very business-like conducted. And I kind of realized this isn't where I want to be. And then I got into a public school in Sea Point on the main road. And there was children coming from the townships because it was en route for the mother's work trip. And children that couldn't speak English properly, so they were engaged in it. There was an English school, but they couldn't speak English properly, and because of that, were really mistreated inside the classroom. So I would see a teacher hit a child because they're not listening, but the teacher isn't even considering they're not understanding the language. And I was like, there's no way I can live like this, and then ended up becoming a principal for a school in Philippi, and ended up working there for 3-4 years, basically being there from 7 to 7, because we decided to do a bilingual, so that children are learning their mother tongue as well as English at the same time to prepare them better, and that just set me on a road to starting the Anton Lubowski Educational Trust, which I shared about it the other day, that we've been working in a community for about 14 years, trying to develop a sort of world-class primary school within the area, and it hasn't been easy being a white person, funnily enough. So yeah, and now I work in the literacy space, so early childhood development, early literacy, where we've developed a concept called story play, where the whole learning for children takes place using story. And giving the main thing is that children have agency, which children don't get in classrooms at all. So agency, language, story, just basically listening to their interests and developing their learning around that. And now that I have my own children, which is probably part of the bio of my life, now that I have 2 children, parenting isn't easy, but I can't tell you how much I absolutely love it. The chaos of all that, and having my own children now has given me so much more oomph for knowing that children need this kind of education, where they are really considered as human beings, not as something of something. But anyway, it was a very long intro, sorry.
Activism runs in the family, and activism runs in the family, in the Calata family also, because Lukhanyo is a colleague in the same industry that I'm in, and you've all taken note of the principled stands that he's taken in terms of media freedom and independence. But tell us more about what you're doing now.
Well, now I work as the program editor at ETV News, with a longtime friend of Nadia's, young Janine Cameron, who was very excited when she heard that I was going to share a platform with Nadia. I've been with ETV News now for about 18 months. Prior to that, I was at the SABC. I worked for them as a parliamentary correspondent. Max referred very briefly to activism there. I don't really think it was activism, but I got fired for I got fired for calling out my bosses at the SABC in 2016. Then I was kind of lumped into like a group called the SABC 8. I mean, I'm a father of a 7-year-old little boy. I'm a husband, I'm a brother, a son. Just a normal chap, I think.
We share the experience of being fired for a particular passion we have that.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Okay, so this is the reunion of fired people, because being fired, it's the only thing that I'm really famous for as a journalist. I was fired 7 times in my life as a journalist. By Business Day, by the Sunday Times, and eventually by the SABC. And it was
You
never
get fired a lot.
you wear it like a badge of honor.
I do mine.
All right, let's get back to the Truth Commission. Now, Lukhanyo, let's talk about your experience of the Truth Commission, because you were much younger then. What is your recollection of the Truth Commission hearings specifically as far as your family was concerned?
I was in high school at the time. I was in boarding school in a little town called Adelaide. And weirdly enough is that Adelaide is right in the middle of Cradock and East London, where the Truth and Reconciliation hearings were heard first. So my mom would make the weekly trip from Cradock to East London and then back. So, and I know that I was never really allowed to go to East London. So the Truth Commission for me was my mother traveling up and down and stopping in Adelaide to say hello, and usually she was accompanied by journalists, some local and then some international, and they, whenever they stop, the cameras would come out, and then I'd obviously go and greet my mom, but there would be these journalists around, and they would be shooting and asking questions and all of those things. And then obviously watching the television, watching you on a Sunday, because one of the teachers they knew obviously that I came from Cradock, that my surname was Calata, so there was a connection. And one of the teachers would watch, and they would always quiz me the next day about what's happening in the TRC and my mother and all of that. So you were a big part of that for me. And I think I had already kind of made up my mind that I wanted to be a journalist at that stage. So by the time that I got to high school and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission started, and the reports that the SABC were doing, and the fact that we were allowed to watch it because it was a Sunday at Hostel, just really solidified my passion of broadcasting. So that really, for me, was the TRC.
Nadia, your recollection?
My grandparents and my dad's younger sister attended the TRC, so I knew that was happening. But it was interesting in the sense that I was a teenager, and I was still going through that phase, I think, of this sort of politics or anything that rings of that kind of thing is something I wasn't really going to engage in because it was too difficult. But what was more important in terms of the TRC for me, it was more the afterwards, which is, that no one had asked for amnesty, so there was no one that came forward regarding my dad's death specifically, which I thought was very unfair in the sort of teenage language, I suppose. We then got, and this is, so years later, it must have been, it was 6 or so years later, now 6 years ago, or I don't know how long it was, that the in-camera transcripts were released. So then there was that whole reopening of that to realize that there was in-camera, conversations that occurred that were actually not public, and now reading through these transcripts was because we then flew to Joburg to read these transcripts, and I mean it was so mind blowing. And again, every time it comes up in that sense, there's this, what can we do now? So there's always this churning of, so what now? Because, you know, this implicates a lot of people. It implicates way more than actually just my dad's case. What now? And I just always felt that throughout, I mean, my dad got assassinated exactly 30 years ago last year, September. And I kind of feel like we're still asking, what now? So that's, I think, the TRC for me. Because I remember thinking, this sounds really nice, because restorative justice sounded like a really good concept. And then I didn't feel I got that at all, like, not even, yeah. And then, so I definitely don't bash it, because I think a lot of good did come out of it. But from a personal perspective, there wasn't really much.
So no restoration and no justice.
Well, yeah, if, you know, we were talking yesterday, it doesn't necessarily mean that my need for whatever the closure is. So, no, none of that. but I mean, no one really came forward for.
You know, no restoration and no justice. If you go to Craddock, and it breaks my heart to say this, but Craddock looks almost exactly like it did 35 years ago when my father was killed. And it's weird because there hasn't been justice for us as a family in that sense, that somebody was tried, stood in court, and then there was a decision by the court that says, well, he's either guilty or he's not. So there hasn't been justice for us in that sense. But also there hasn't been the kind of justice for the kind of society that my father actually died for. You know, the education system in, like, just in general is really in tatters. It's even worse in a small town like Craddock. Right across the road, our neighbor right across the road from us is a principal, he's a school teacher. And he tells me that he's got over 56, 58 children in a class. So if he deals with the first 15, the other 45, you know, they're doing whatever it is that they're doing. By the time that he gets to the other 45, the first 15 have forgotten what they learned. So, and it's incredible how the promise of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the promises thereof have really never been fulfilled. And it's not obviously by the TRC, because the TRC did what it was supposed to do. It wrote, I think, 7 volumes of reports, handed those over to, I think it was President Thabo Mbeki at the time, and then we wait.
I think that sums it up. It was kind of as if too many people were so happy that we can close this door now. And what the Truth Commission was supposed to do is open the door, and then so we could start the journey. And people closed that door and said, okay, we reconciled now. And God, look around you. Are we reconciled? Do we know the truth? And we're paying for that. One of the things that I found most inexplicable was the reluctance of the Mbeki government to prosecute people who either did not ask for amnesty or asked for amnesty and didn't get it. And there wasn't one. And the Truth Commission recommendations were very clear. So we're talking about amnesty again now for corruption. And I think we have very bad memories of that period. So now we're going, doing 1 or 2 cases, more symbolic cases. We have court cases. Neil Aggart's case is on at the moment. It's more symbolic because it's a long time ago. Nobody can remember. it's important. I think it's important that we do that, but we should have done this earlier. And I still don't have an explanation why Thabo Mbeki and his cabinet resisted those prosecutions, and why they resisted the Truth Commission recommendations to award people scholarships and money and all kinds of things after that. And I think that was the sort of Thabo Mbeki, Trevor Manuel thing that I think that will weigh heavily on their legacy in that sense.
I found it rich the other day when Thabo Mbeki spoke out on the comments by F.W. de Klerk. And Thabo said, you know, he's going to send de Klerk this letter, you know, or this document that confirms that apartheid was in fact a crime against humanity. And I laughed when I saw that on television, because Thabo somehow now wants us to believe that he is this guy and he's fighting for us. Yet it was the same guy that refused to prosecute de Klerk for his role in the murders of the Craddock Four. When my wife and I, we were doing the research for our book, it probably took about a week and a half to source actual documents of the Secretariat of the State Security Council. Those documents had contained in the minutes of those meetings. Now, some of the people that were present at those meetings of the State Security Council were F.W. de Klerk. In 1985, de Klerk was Minister of Basic Education and Training. There are memos that came from the State Security Council that at the next meeting, de Klerk must make an input as to what to do about these two teachers from Craddock in the Eastern Cape. Now, in January 1985, this is what I found very interesting. In January 1985, the town council in Lingelihle stepped down, which in essence rendered the control of the municipality in Lingelihle over into the hands of the people. So I then, for a period of about 6 months of my life, and Dorothy, we lived in a township, in a zone that was liberated from the hands of the apartheid government. So the people made their decisions. It was free. So the ANC, you know, when they talk about how they brought us liberation, they are our liberators. I always tell them that they're not, because I actually lived in a community that had liberated itself under apartheid. So whatever freedom it is that they think that they brought us, they didn't. De Klerk was involved in the murder of the Craddock Four. He comes out 35 years later and then he says, but apartheid could not have been a crime against humanity. And Thabo wants us to believe that, oh, now he's now fighting for us, and he's sending this document to de Klerk. When he was president, he actually failed to do something and prosecute de Klerk and everybody else that were denied amnesty. My father's case was an open and shut case. In the second inquest, which ended 18 days, on the 28th of May in 1994, 18 days after Nelson Mandela had actually took over as president of the republic, a judge, Neville Zitzman, said that the Craddock Four was killed by the apartheid state. He could unfortunately not point out the individuals that were involved, but he said it was within the apartheid state. So the ANC had 18 days into our democracy, they were given the platform to prosecute the people responsible for my father's death. And they still haven't done so.
And I think, Nadia, the same is the case with your dad. That, I mean, I've done several documentaries. I've written a whole lot about our research into who and why Anton was assassinated. And at some point, we went to the Attorney General and confronted him in his office, and he was claiming Namibia is now a sovereign country, and they were hiding behind that. And I kept on saying to them, but the conspiracy to murder happened here, and we can prove it. We can prove, in fact, in that room, in the Protea Hotel in Rosebank, these people were together, and these are the documents, these are the notes. So it's again almost like now, where you have investigative journalists who can prove all kinds of state capture and corruption, but the state can't. And there were cases in Namibia itself with HSN, and that it must leave you very frustrated to see the state bungling or not even trying to exact justice for Anton's death.
I'm not quite sure where to actually place the frustration, because I know that, ultimately nothing's going to bring him back. So that's the one thing. The second thing is that it really is more about his legacy and, the fact that he died and the way that he was killed. He won the Bruno Kreisky Award for Human Rights 6 months before he was assassinated. Namibia was on the road to independence. It was all already decided there. There was a pre-election process that occurred. It's, for me, still so confusing. Why then still kill him? Like, it just didn't, in that sense, it just doesn't make sense. So then it's more about wanting particular answers that one keeps getting little teasers for, and then kind of it gets ripped away again. So as an example, for instance, the NPA approached us and asked us about information, and we had a lawyer on it and everything. And I sat with I don't know what his name was now when he was head of the NPA, that he said, it's on the top of our agenda. Like, your dad's death is on the top of our agenda. We are going to deal with this. And then they waited for a particular date. And then we got the letter to say that date has now passed, so now we basically can't do anything anymore. And I mean, the sheer I don't even know what word to describe that with, to kind of build up that kind of hope, and then to immediately just go, and now your hands are tied again. But then there's also the other components, like my dad was buried in Katatura, and it was a decision that the family took, that there was no way he would have wanted to be in a white graveyard. And a couple of years ago, it was also in Namibian independence, and we were approached by the AG of Namibia, and it was apparently directly from the president, and he was saying, the Lubowski family must come back to Namibia, and they're asking for permission for his remains to be moved to Heroes Acre. And it was, my mom, because my mom is the one that has tirelessly fought for his legacy, and then there wasn't really any remains because he was cremated, but the whole thing was then moved to Heroes Acre, and the request from our side was, could we have a conversation with the current president, Hage Geingob, because he was one of the last people to see my father on Kaiserstraße, the now Independence Avenue, and he just point blank refuses to see us. And I don't understand that.
In fact, he was a close friend of Anton.
He was a close friend. I remember sitting on his lap. I remember being with a lot of, and the confusion of, from just a personal level, why is there this dead end that keeps happening? So even with we've brought up the case so often, and every time it hits the same place, and it just goes completely dead quiet. And it's just, I don't understand why.
Yeah. I also don't understand. Do you think it would be a lack of political will. Is it a case of the Mbeki government and the governments after that saying, this is a fragile coexistence of white and black, and for the national project and cohesion, we shouldn't stir? I really don't buy that. Is it sheer incompetence? Why is it? Why is it that the Mbeki government and after that, they couldn't find it in themselves to prosecute these cases? It is simple justice.
So the only answer I have, I know you're going to want to give yours too, is that there are particular deaths. You know, there's Dulcie September, Chris Hani, and the common thread that runs between them is there was a threat of some exposure. So the book Incorruptible, and I you know, people have various opinions about the book itself, but the common thread in that book is that all three of these people threatened exposure of something, and then very soon after were murdered. So my thing is, and it's one of the things that as an answer that I've definitely, because of all the subsequent things. So you know, if I read the stuff that my dad did in a bullet point perspective of helping Namibia become independent, is to some degree mind-blowing, even to the point of that he set SWAPO up financially in such a way that they were able to carry over that independence. And something must have happened where someone was going to be exposed, and then you've got to remove that person. It's just the nature of the game at the time, I suppose. So that's the only conclusion that, you know, we can come up with, because whatever that was going to be exposed is going to, in all the cases that if that gets exposed, so, you know, and I've got my reasons of what that exposure would be, but I don't want to voice that here. But basically, I just think it basically, I'm very worried about the particular anger that exists in our country. And that doesn't come from nowhere. Besides the terrible, inhumane system that we have, there's more to that. And I just think if we could expose what actually happened, I think there would be a platform to then deal with what we're actually dealing with. But that's just my opinion.
I think the ANC is, in our case, completely compromised. I think that there were decisions taken by individuals who weren't supposed to take decisions, who then used my father and the deaths of the Craddock Four as a bartering tool to get whatever it is that they wanted, with the promise that we won't prosecute. That's what our family believes, because we can't reconcile the fact that there were people who used to work with my dad and Matthew, who are sitting in very high positions in government today, and yet those people they've done absolutely nothing, you know. And it's incredible, because some of them, I mean, I used to work in Parliament for a number of years, and I would see some of these politicians, and some, you know, some of them, when I would come around the corner and they're not expecting me, right? They would then kind of have to feign, you know, like, oh, hey, how are you, and how's the family? And most of them always ask me, like, how's the family? But in some cases, if I would be coming down, walking up Parliament Street, say maybe towards the National Assembly or somewhere, and then I would see a politician and they would see me, I find it interesting, because they would duck, they would, you know, go somewhere, or they would turn around, or they would do something. And it's fun for me, because, you know what I mean, I would walk around and be like, yeah, you better run away, you know. but in essence, I understand what it is. And I think much as Nadia is saying, because we don't have any answers, we're forced to make up our own answers as to why. Why hasn't the ANC done anything? Why haven't they? You know, it's today we have VBS, you know, the VBS scandal. We have that scandal as a direct, in my head at least, it's a direct consequence to the fact that we live in a society where there are no consequences for what you do. So you can kill someone and then nothing will happen to you, and then you'll grow up and you'll set up a foundation and you'll name it after yourself, and then you proceed to lecture us about what democracy is. I laugh sometimes when I see a statement from F.W. de Klerk Foundation pop up in my emails, and he's lecturing us about democracy. I was like, come on, man. You know what I mean? It's like, you should speak last about what democracy is. But so Julius Malema then gets himself involved in the EFF and their cronies. They get themselves involved in VBS. They loot a bank of 2 billion rand. But they do so with a level of impunity because they know nothing's going to happen to them. Because this is the society in which the ANC has engendered over the last 25, 26 years. That you can get away with murder in this country. We don't have accountability in this country. Senzo Muyiwa was a goalkeeper who played for Orlando Pirates and for Bafana Bafana. He was shot inside a house where there were witnesses. That was a couple of years ago, 5, 6 years ago. Not a single person has been arrested. Yet he was shot inside a house and there were witnesses inside the house. So that's the kind of society. And it boils down, and every day that passes without there being justice for the Craddock Four, without there being justice for your dad, without there being justice for Victoria Mhlenge or Nokuthula Simelane, or like just a range of people, is that continuation of a society that's not based on accountability, a society that's not based on justice. And if you're going to build a society that's not based on justice, then what are you building?
On a personal note, I know both your mothers, and I'm absolutely in awe of your mothers. They are resilient, remarkable human beings. And I remember often being jealous of you guys, because I grew up without a mother. My mother died when I was a baby, and I never had a mother. And then I look at your mother, especially whom I've known, and your mother, whom I've met many times. And you are blessed with mothers like those. And that is so true of our societies. Many people would say, well, thank God for my mother. And yet, we don't look after our mothers very well in this society. I want to come to you guys and ask if you have any contributions. I would love to hear.
The thing that upsets me every time I hear these stories, Max, is what Nadia and Lukhanyo both refer to, which is this kind of deadening that starts to happen, a deadening of response to this horror, this closing out and shutting down and pushing away. And I every time I come back here, and I'm fortunate that I can and do, I'm so struck by the level of energy and passion and remarkable sort of contribution that people are making to trying to resurrect this democracy and breathe life into it and give it what it deserves. And yet, Lukhanyo, what you say, and as a lawyer, about this lack of accountability, which seems to be so foundational to it, that we can't just keep going with this amazing aspiration for what South Africa needs to be. We know what that is. But what we keep forgetting is this idea of accountability. And if we don't get that right, you know, we have to build it into everything we do, everything. Because people have to know that they must pay for what happened. People get away with murder. We have to deal with that trauma, and I believe that accountability is a way of dealing with trauma. So when I hear it, and I know, Nadia, that you've been through, Lukhanyo, I don't know as much, but Nadia, I know what you've been through with the release recently of Ferdy Barnard, who was one of the architects of your father's assassination, and that sort of denialism that seems to permeate, that shutting out. We have to hold people to account, and we have to do it all the time. It's our... these kinds of conversations really are so critical to that. And I wish there were thousands of people hearing what you guys have been talking about this morning. So thank you. And thanks for the opportunity, Max.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think the accountability thing, it is, as Lukhanyo said, and as you said, Andy, it's so fundamental to our society that there is no accountability. And then something happens, and if you judge by Twitter and Facebook and the media and talk radio, the first knee-jerk reaction would be of people, so you want to drag Jacob Zuma before court for state capture, but F.W. de Klerk is running around. And you feel irritated by that, and then you think again, and you think, sadly, there's some truth to that. If we cannot even find it in ourselves to establish accountability for our evil past, what legitimacy has any effort to establish that in the legitimate democracy we have now? So I'm afraid we will have to go back and dig back into that past, and we will have to have more of these cases, and journalists like us should still dig in the past, because that sore is still festering.
I just want to bring a little bit of what you're saying in terms of what we're currently dealing with in the country, that I feel, because I was so moved by these things that sit with us as a book. Firstly, also just the title, and then also just reading so much of what individuals, people have gone through in an unjust system, sort of as a collective. And there's, I don't know how you feel about this, Lukhanyo, but these individual stories people live with, and they lost people, and they lost homes, and people were moved, and there's a huge pain that sits there. But I feel like I've gotten the opportunity to deal with this in multiple ways, because my dad's story keeps coming up in various forums. And even though it's hard to keep going between that sort of layers of the onion, I suppose, that get delayed, as well as sort of moving in and out of trying to live my life, but yet this is so part of my history, so keep coming back here is so important. But what I wanted to say is that a lot of these things for people in the apartheid system happened when they were children, and being who we are today is very much formed in our childhood. So there's this memory, there's this collective memory of that I hold as a child, that's what I went through. We were both children when it happened, when the trauma happened for us. And then there's the children of the people that have gone through that almost relive that trauma as a second generation. And what I'm just pointing to is that I at the time of my dad's fighting the apartheid system was the wrong color. So we would go to public places and we would get really badly teased and bullied and stuff because my dad was fighting for the apartheid system, so you're not like us. The words that they used were actually so hectic. But we actually then had to be removed from our school. I couldn't speak a word of English when I got moved into an English school because it was mixed race, whereas the German, the school that I was at, were bullying us so badly that we had to get taken out. So I went through that kind of trauma, and then when when South Africa became independent, I was once again the wrong color because now I'm the color of the oppressor. And what I just find so important for us to deal with is in this country is that it's actually not about color anymore. Like, I have anger towards white people for the same reason that still today some of them don't actually know what people went through. There are genuinely people in this country that have no fucking idea what actually happened. So that's that. But then there's the part that there's a whole population of people that want restore, that would like some kind of justice or would like to be heard, or and in my opinion, that has to do with poverty and wealth and all these things which still sit in a particular person's hand. But then we have our politicians who are meant to actually be doing something and now are doing the same as the white oppressors did in the first place. And no one, I don't feel that through the communities that I work with, they don't have the courage to admit that this is our people doing this to us now in the present, because it's too painful, because it might take me back to the pain that I experienced in apartheid time. So there's just, from an emotional point of view, I just feel we as a country, and especially I'm finding us young people, and I mean I'm saying young, us young people that
You could look at me and then say young.
but like us as young people that should be, as a second generation, should actually be holding hands much tighter around actually doing something about this, because we're not the oppressors, we're not the people that did, it doesn't matter the color, but that we should hold hands around, okay, so what do we do against this? Because, these idiotic people, and don't even have words for that, are all in our past.
I mean, it's weird that I hold black people to a higher standard than what I do white people. It's just true. In the sense that black people should know better, right? So if you're a politician and you're black, you should know better, because we were all in the same trenches, we were all treated this way by the apartheid government. So you can't then go into a public office and then do as your white counterpart did before you. Under apartheid, I could never expect that the same people that killed my dad would be the same people that gives us justice. It would never happen, because it would mean that they have to then try themselves, they have to find themselves guilty and all of that. So under a black government, I had expected justice. Justice in all forms of the word. Justice for the life of a man that was taken, a father that was taken from his children, a husband that was taken from his wife, a brother that was taken from his brothers and sisters, a son that was taken from his parents. So in that way, there should have been justice for my dad. Just in that, because he was a human being that walked this earth. But then there's the fact that he was a community activist. He was then elevated by the people into becoming a community leader, a political leader, who was then assassinated for political reasons. So there should have been, in that aspect, also been some form of justice. But that hasn't come. So, excuse me, if politicians are in office, but they're not serving the interests and the will of the people, why are they in office? Why do we continue today to have the system of election in which we do? We know that excuse me, we know, for instance, that Faith Mutambi, today Faith Mutambi sits as the chairperson of a portfolio in Parliament. But we know that Faith Mutambi got herself involved in some criminal activities while she was Minister of Communications. So she should be in prison. In a normal society, she should be in prison. Instead, today, she's sitting as the chairperson of a portfolio committee in Parliament. So too Mosebenzi Zwane. His relationship with the Guptas and everything that's come out at the Zondo Commission, he should be in prison. And for me, what I find is also that the ANC has continued the apartheid legacy of not placing value on a black life, right? So by not giving us justice, it's continued that aspect. That therefore, de Klerk can come out and say, but apartheid was never a crime against humanity, because de Klerk has never recognized us as humans. To him, we've always been something just below human. So how can you commit a crime against humanity when these blacks aren't actually humans? And the ANC is responsible for propagating that and for continuing that sense, because it has failed to put a value on a black life by making sure that those people who killed our fathers and our mothers and our brothers and our sisters, our sons and our daughters, that those people are actually held accountable.
I think that contempt is also shown in the quality of our education system. We go to the suburbs, especially in this town. I mean, the school that Anton went to, Paul Roos Gymnasium, is one of the best in the world in terms of secondary schools. And then you go to Kayamandi and you go next door and there's nothing. And that is contempt for the dignity of young black people. What are our best universities? What should have been our best university in South Africa today? Certainly Fort Hare, the breeding place of leaders in our subcontinent for many generations. And yet it's UCT and Stellenbosch and Wits. And Fort Hare is an appalling place. I go there often, I teach there. It's appalling what's happening there. And that is a kind of a disdain for black people's lives that I find very fundamentally disturbing. Anybody else with something? There's you. I want Pumla, I want you to speak. Also.
Nadia, firstly, I would have been one of the children who teased and bullied you at school. Max knows my history, and I can't go back to that young person and say you are being misled, but I am sorry. I don't seek forgiveness. I am sorry for those experiences. Lukhanyo, I would not even have known you at school. That was just the way. I went to the University of Pretoria in 1986, and I think there were 4 black people on campus, and that was the reality. But I just want to stop at 2 points and ask you firstly, the German experience of prosecutions after Nuremberg was also that it took about 20 years for them to start prosecuting their war criminals. It took them another 20 years after that to start prosecuting the enablers of those war crimes. So I think we must maybe just say to ourselves, this is not such a unique experience that it almost takes a generation. And I agree with you, it should have happened 20 years ago, but it is. And then my question to everybody on the panel is, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued certain recommendations. I read them the other day again. And they were very firm recommendations. And it talked about this being a start. It talked about that we need to work on a national project of the psychological damage that was done. Looking back now, how do you feel that not a single one of those recommendations were ever followed? And in context, I actually read it because they made recommendations on the land question as well, and said this is something, this error that we haven't addressed.
If I may start, just on the issue of the recommendations. One of the recommendations had to deal with community rehabilitation. And this one sits quite close to my heart. Let me explain. So from 1984, February 1984, all the way to about April 1985, period of about 15, 16 months, the young children in Cradock didn't go to school. There was a school boycott. It was one of the longest school boycotts in the history of South African, of South Africa. So there was these young men and these young women who were, engaged in physical battles with the apartheid apparatus on a daily basis. Cradock, it was violent. Every day there was a skirmish with the police. So the levels of trauma that young black men and women suffered during their time, they were taken out of school. Some of them didn't complete their schooling. Dorothy knows about this. She can talk to it a lot more personally because she was a little bit older than I am. So the recommendation by the TRC of community rehabilitation would have meant the world for some of the young people in Cradock, because it would have meant some level of assistance in them finishing their schooling, in them finishing their education, getting some level of a skill, a trade, or something that they can then use to put food on the table, not just for themselves, but also their families. So when the ANC then fails to implement those recommendations, it fails those people, those very same people that had helped bring us to this point, right? And you can't fault the TRC because they did what they had to do. Now we have to look at the African National Congress and we have to ask them as to why were these things not followed? It seems that they did nothing else other than enrich themselves at our expense. Why do we need them? Why do we have to beg them? Why do we have to beg the people who say, no, I want to be a leader, I want to be a servant? Why do we have to beg them for service? The ANC has failed us in so many different ways. And this is going to continue for generations.
I want to make 3 remarks, and the one I'm not certain of whether I should make it. But you started off by, this is a conversation, Pumla, about history and trauma and perhaps the road that we want to take. And you started off by telling us that this was the old police station when you were a student here. This building was also served as a slave lodge for a very long time. And Paul Roos later started here. So perhaps it is significant that your conversations take place here. Nadia remarked to you, my sense is that people will write your dad's story in a variety of ways, and that it will be fantastic if you or someone in your family deliberately tell the story and write the story, very similar to what you've done, Lukhanyo, about your family. So that we have a recollection of your dad from a perspective where you can tell the story, where the story is told from the perspective of, and not only the pockets of stories that we have of your dad. And then to Andrea, my recollection of the TRC was around, I grew up in Uppington. My recollection was exactly the story of Nadia's dad and what happened in Uppington 26, etc. And I must thank you for that book, because it also got me to understand something of my history and story, and perhaps also helped me with sense making around what was almost a painfully glamorous experience of the TRC in Uppington, where I grew up. So thank you also for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
I mean, I don't know if one can create some kind of will for those recommendations, because those recommendations don't ever go away, right? They're still there, and there's still some, there's still some opportunity to hold accountable for the recommendations that have been made. And I just find, in particularly, this whole land thing being a very huge component of where we're sort of entering as a country. So I just think, maybe there could be some opportunity for one to still maybe rise those recommendations as, guys, you still haven't done anything about this. And ultimately, it's actually not too late. Like, just because you didn't do something about it immediately, which we're not sure if we'll forgive you for that or not, but ultimately, let's actually bring those up again. So
I agree with that, because we are all feeling very depressed about the state of South Africa and the state of the economy and poverty and inequality and unemployment. And I think we see it again that when we look at our society, we should know that we should not put our hope and our trust in politicians. We should turn to ourselves. Who fought state capture? Not the ANC. Who forced the ANC to turn their backs on Jacob Zuma? Not the ANC. We did. Civil society did. And I think maybe this is one of the few positive spin-offs of the apartheid era, especially the 80s, the internal resistance of the UDF and Kusatu. The sort of activism that we have as a people, which is why we are still an open society, which is why what is happening in Turkey and in Hungary and in Poland and Venezuela in terms of closing down freedoms will never happen here. Will never happen. We will not allow it. So civil society is what makes me excited about South Africa. And yet then we go to the polls and we mess up, because the people of Makana will vote for the ANC again next year. They just removed
Just
them.
on that, should we as civil society not be pushing, for instance, for the implementation of the recommendations by the Van Zyl Slabbert report
Yeah.
about the way in which we elect those people that sit in our public office?
I mean, to have constituency-based
Yeah,
representation.
exactly. Isn't that where we are, where we should be going now as a society? Because it's blatantly clear to everybody that the system that we have now isn't working. It isn't working for me to go and vote for a party, and then that party then decides, no, but I'm going to put Jacob Zuma here.
Yeah.
Right? In a normal society, Jacob Zuma should have never come anywhere near the office of the presidency. Anywhere near. But because we voted for the ANC, and then the 5,000 delegates at the Polokwane conference, they decided that this is who we, not even 5,000, about 2,500 of those delegates. They then decided that this is who we want as president. We then vote for that organization, and then that organization gives us a criminal like Jacob Zuma, or Faith Mutambi, or whoever. Should we not be pushing to get a society where we say, no, I want Nadia to be the mayor of the town where I live in.
Yeah.
Therefore, I will go out and go and campaign for people in this room to vote for her, because I can vouch that she will be a good leader for us.
And we can hold her accountable.
Whereas now, how do we hold the ANC accountable? How do we hold the Democratic Alliance accountable? Right? How do we hold the EFF accountable? The EFF refuses to speak to our news organization. completely. They turn us down. Whenever we approach them for comment, they turn us down. And they do so on the basis that, oh no, we know Calata's going to ask us some question. But that's why I'm a journalist, because when we send journalists out to stories, now that I am an editor, I have an influence in what type of questions those journalists ask. We don't get invited. We were told, well, you and ENCA, and you're part of the same mother company, right? So now imagine, based on the EFF's rhetoric, they get voted into power. What will happen to us as journalists? We would be in serious trouble. If we thought we were in trouble now, we would be, yeah. So I do think that maybe going forward, we really need to push Parliament to really take this issue of the way our electoral laws, we need a change in it. We definitely need to change the way we elect our people.
Here's a question here.
It would really, really be important for us to really own our stories, our government, our place within our country. And I think it was just like sort of re-emphasized and reiterated. But what I think is really, really getting to mind now is the processes that have been started, like with the unit of historical trauma and transformation, that even within a space such as Stellenbosch University, a space is opened up for us to be able to have these open and honest conversations about these difficult issues. Because elsewhere, this is really, really not done. And people are really being shut up not to be able to tell truth. So I think if, each and every one of us can go out and do what was done in the past, and that is ukusebeza, where you go and you tell another about the recommendations and what you've heard and what would work for the country, surely but slowly, we will be able to get to a point where we will all be able to speak the same language, and that is a language of healing for our nation.
Yeah, so I'm a 22-year-old South African, so I've only voted once nationally, and our journalism class, we did a whole paper on the election, so I knew what was going on and so on. But when I went to go and vote and I had to choose who to vote for, I found myself feeling I'm just choosing who's the least shit. And that's very, very sad that I feel like that at 22. I don't know how the rest of you feel then. Because what do we do? Because we say the ANC, we can't keep them accountable. The EFF, with the little power that they do have also shown that they can't be trusted. The DA only cares about white interests. So what do we do? And I think I'm not that much concerned for myself or for most of the people in this room, because let's be real, if you're upper middle class and so on, it doesn't affect you as much. I'm more worried about what happens to people who are waiting for, help from the government for grants and so on. What happens to them? Because we're all still fine, we're like, oh, Eskom, I don't have power, but it's fine, it's you and your power bank against the world. But for other people, it makes a big, big difference. So what do we do? What can we do for them? Because yes, I think it's great that civil society is trying to keep people to account, but in the meanwhile, what are we going to do while other people's lives are at stake?
Before you go, Richard, can you maybe get an electronic petition going? And then you can get as many of your friends on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and everybody, and to get to sign it, and then send it through to Parliament. I think it's the Committee of Home Affairs, and then you ask the committee to please relook at the recommendations of the Van Zyl-Slabbert report. I think if you do that, and you and your friends, and then once you have the petition out, I will sign it, and then I'll get some of my friends to sign it, and then hopefully in that way we can build something strong enough. I promise you, I will give you all of my support.
So will I.
We've run out of time, but there is another form of activism going on, and we see it in Makana, in Old Grahamstown, where ordinary people went to the court and said, we don't want this council, it was dissolved. We're seeing it in Harry Smith in the Free State, we're seeing it in Potchefstroom in Northwest, where local communities are getting up and saying, we can actually make our sewage system work, we can fix our schools, we can take all these diseases out of our clinics. And I think I'm looking forward to that kind of local activism to become a wave that will so embarrass the national politicians that there would be a change. We got Richard.
I just want to come to the point you made about the Nuremberg situation and time. And I think because I'm interested in how we manage transitional time and what we do with the time we have, it takes time, but time in itself doesn't have the quality to accomplish anything. It is what you do in that time, and what I think we have to be aware of what the second generation in Germany did in that time to create a situation in which the government had to do something. Because given what left on their own, the German government wouldn't have wanted anything to be done. Things would have continued seamlessly. So it is what actually we do, and actually the people like you have the agency to say, we are not happy with this shit. We are not pleased with this situation. It is impossible that nothing is being done. It is when actually the people who have stakes in these things feel so powerfully about them emotionally that they cannot continue as a generation, as society, unless something is done that forces politicians to do something, because politicians, by virtue of the principle of state continuity, they will want to do what the previous states have done, and I suppose that's what's happening in South Africa. And I want to finish really by asking a question to South Africans who are here, as somebody who grew up in the Rwandan genocide and saw what happened after the Rwandan genocide. And that is the question you seem to all be asking. What is the sort of kind of the political imagination that you need here in South Africa? Because I think recycling constitutional stuff, recycling the same institutions as the apartheid state, it's not working, and that's what you have been doing. So when the Rwandan situation is totally different, we had to come out to go with all sorts of homegrown situations and solutions. And a lot of those things are imperfect, but there is a sort of ownership. But what I'm curious about is who and where is the site of political imagination, the sort of, and how we make that happen, really.
I think one of the things that with the Jacob Zuma, his government, is that there is a potential on the ground that has happened. I mean, we had the highest protest in the world throughout his term in the last. So we need to actually, as a people, understand the activism that has been happening on the ground and actually link up with those things. There's been many mistakes, and civil society were critical, but actually ordinary people in informal settlements have been protesting for the last 15 years or so, and have been organized in different ways that we need to relate to those struggles in various ways. But I think the appeal for me is for the intellectuals, those who are in the room, the ability, I guess, Spencer Heat stuff of speaking truth to power, which is very, very important. I mean, right now we're talking about lead without compensation as a slogan, but what does it actually mean, like in terms of the institution, how it's going to be distributed and other things? And I think as intellectuals across race and so on, I think that's our job to actually think about these things critically and also critique. It's not enough for me, yes, the ANC has not done the work, EFF, yes, it's problematic, but what is the intellectual work that relates to the people, reflects the struggle on the ground, and actually start thinking hard and long about what type of, if it's a state, what type of a state do we imagine within ourselves that actually can do the reforms and actually the distribution that is required. And I think it's a call for intellectual work to actually start going beyond ourselves and asking far more critical questions as they come from the ground in different ways, and organize ourselves both intellectually but also find ways to relate to the ground in different ways. And I think what has happened in various ways is like sometimes we're too divorced to the ground to link it back to our intellectual work. And I think that's where the core certain questions are important about the land question and so on, and reforms, and that we have to think about in this process.
Thank you. Just before Christmas last year, there was a knock on my door. I lived in Cape Town, and I opened the door, and there was this bent old man looking at me. And for a moment, I thought he was sick and he needed help. And he put out his hand and he said, "Would you mind if I came in? My name is Adrian Vlok." He's the former Minister of Police. He came into my house to apologize and ask my forgiveness because they tried to assassinate me twice and they blew up my office and they did all kinds of other stuff. And he washed my feet. It was one of the more awkward things in my life. But what do you say to an 80-year-old man who says, "You will change my life if you allow me"? And I said to him, when all this was done, I said, "I appreciate your humbling yourself to do this, but what we need more is, tell me, who did you send to? Who was the guy who planted the bomb in my office? What was the identity of that man with the assassination rifle who missed me? What was his name? And who gave him an order?" And he just sat back and said, "I'm so old I forget about those things." And I said, "I'm sorry. That waters down my acceptance of your apology." And that's a bit of the story in South Africa. And we shouldn't wait for those old bastards to forget and to get so old. We need, I'm not saying put them in jail or torture or kill them. I'm just saying put them up there so we can look them in the eye and they can tell us and we can know, because that's what's important. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you will attend the other meetings in this series too.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation and for all of you as well. There are 2 more sessions tomorrow morning. We will be talking to Willem Verwoerd and Candice Mama about their books, writing their books about very personal engagement with perpetrators. And on Sunday we will have same place, same time, conversation about Morphe. So I hope to see you there. And this to Max, Nadia, and Lukhanyo. Thank you very much.